the ages of 0 and 100, please come forward for kids message. It's we're I believe that we are far enough away from lunch so we can talk about food, right? Do you know what tuna is? Do either of you like tuna? Will does not like tuna. Eva, she's now impresses me even more. My daughter Emily, you see, the pastor once told Emily that they put rat hair in tuna. Do you believe that? She believed it. And so you have tuna, right? I haven't bought tuna this week because for me, it has really good protein, different flavors. And my wife said she's getting sick of ham sandwiches for lunch when she goes to work. So guess what you get? Anyway, it's actually pretty good. It has lots of protein and little calories. So, Eva, you're eating the tuna, you're getting muscles. Did you know that? So you're going to be stronger than Will. But Will, if you eat tuna, you could be as strong as Eva. So anyway, the point of it is, though, is that people see something and they see two different things, right? In the book of John, there's this guy named Lazarus, and he dies, okay? And then Jesus comes along 4 days later, and he says, Lazarus, come out. And the guy comes out of the tomb totally alive. He was dead, now he's alive. Two different groups of people. Some believe in Jesus because of that. They followed Jesus. But others, have you heard of the Pharisees? Basically, they're really bad people. Some go to the Pharisees and they go, we'll just pretend the guy over there in the corner is the Pharisee. You see the guy who's in red? And they go, do you know what Jesus did? And they tell everything to that Pharisee over there. They're trying to get Jesus in trouble. Well, so you see, when people hear the word Jesus, there's two different responses. Some believe in Jesus, and some people, they actually hate Jesus. And that's sad. I hope that you two are the two that absolutely love Jesus. You guys love Jesus? Okay. So, have a good time at Children's Church. I had an idea, but you know my ideas? Some are good, some are really bad. So I'm going to end it right now and not go with my idea. So have fun in Children's Church. I was actually going to say, one group, you guys go, I love Jesus, yes I do, and let's see if the adults can be louder. But anyway, it's my brain. So it's kind of weird to talk about what I'm going to talk about when we're going to be getting snow. But anyway, every once in a while in the Midwest, a storm rolls in. You can feel it, especially if you're older. Your knees start aching, your elbows start aching, even before the storm comes in. Then you look off in the distance, and the sky turns a strange shade of green. The wind starts picking up. The air gets heavy. You look across the fields, and you see the clouds building. Huge, big clouds like marshmallows. And they get darker and darker. And then you hear it, thunder in a distance. When that happens, most people start heading inside. Phones buzz with weather alerts. People check the radar on their phones. Isn't that cool? You're all going, well, the storm is coming. And then other people have other opinions too. But we all check our radar. But then some people, they head to the basement. They tie everything outside that can move down. But I have to admit something. When those storms roll in, I'm the guy standing outside. I'm watching the clouds. I'm taking the pictures. I'm listening to my wife yell, "Get your butt inside!" Oh, anyway, and I'm listening as the thunder gets closer and closer. Now, don't worry. I am not completely foolish. My escape is 10 feet away, and I don't normally run. But if I see a tornado coming, I'm running for the basement. But there's something about the power of a storm that pulls you in. You can't help but watch. What's interesting, though, is how different people react to the storm. Some people run for cover right away. Some stand at the window watching. Some panic. Some are fascinated. Same storm, same sky, same thunder, but completely different reactions. And those reactions tell you something about the people experiencing it. For instance, in the book of John, the same thing happens when people encounter Jesus. The same Jesus can stand right in front of people, and the response can be completely different. Some respond in worship, some respond in curiosity, some respond with faith, and some with hardened opposition. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, that's exactly what we see. One dinner in a small village called Bethany, and the presence of Jesus begins to reveal the hearts of everyone in that room. Let us read John 12, 1-8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have, but you do not always have me." So 6 days before the Passover, Jerusalem is about busting out with pilgrims. Families are traveling all over the place, making their way towards the city to celebrate the great feast. Just 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, in a small village called Bethany, something quiet and deeply personal is happening. Jesus has returned there. Can you imagine it? Jesus. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if anybody ever watched The Lord of the Rings, but in the beginning, this guy named Gandalf comes into town, and everybody's just so excited. I mean, I just picture that. But think about it. This is like totally remarkable, because the religious leaders in Jerusalem have already decided that they want Jesus dead. Word has spread everywhere. If you see Jesus, you are to report it to the religious leaders. So basically, Jesus had a bounty on his head. Yet here he is back in Bethany, the very place where he performed that miracle, raising Lazarus from the dead, that has apparently stirred everything up. The village is where Lazarus lives. The same Lazarus who has been dead. The same Lazarus who's already had a funeral. The man who laid in the tomb for 4 days until Jesus stood outside and called his name, and the dead man came out alive. We read past this so quickly. Could you imagine the conversations? I mean, people are talking about this. Some are trying to make sense of it. But honestly, a dead man comes alive? What's there to make sense of? But tonight in Bethany, a dinner has been prepared in Jesus' honor. So the room is arranged the way formal meals were in the ancient world. A low table sits at the center, shaped like a U. The guests are all reclining around it. They are leaning on their left arms, their feet stretched out behind them away from the table. And Martha? Martha is doing exactly what Martha always does. She is serving. Oh, I love Marthas in my life. She's moving in and out of the room, carrying dishes, making sure everyone is taken care of. For Martha, this is an act of love. Service is her way of honoring the Lord. And then there's Lazarus. He's sitting at the table with Jesus. Think about that for a moment. Not long ago, he was wrapped in burial cloths inside of a tomb. But now he's right at the dinner table. He's sharing a meal with Jesus, who called him back to life. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. His very presence is a testimony. Anyone who walks into the room can see the evidence of Jesus' power sitting right there at the table. But the center of the attention is not Lazarus, it is Mary. At some point during the meal, Mary disappears, and she's carrying something very valuable. In her hands is a container of perfume, pure nard. Now, this is not ordinary perfume. It comes from a plant that grows far away in northern India. To produce even a small amount of perfume is a lot of work. The oil must be extracted from large quantities of plant material and then transported over long distances. For any of you who have ever made apple cider, you know what I'm talking about. It takes a lot of apples to make apple cider, just like this perfume. And Mary has a full Roman pound of it, more than 11 ounces. It's worth 300 denarii. In other words, it's about a year's worth of wages for an average worker. Now, if you had this perfume in your house in that ancient time, that would have been very valuable. It may have been one of the most valued possessions the family owned. But Mary does not treat it that way. She walks over to Jesus, who's reclining at the table. She moves around the outside of the guests, and she kneels down at the feet of Jesus. Then she pours it out. All 11 ounces, the oil runs over Jesus' feet. Instead of using a cloth, she loosens her hair. That alone is shocking. In that culture, a woman's hair was her glory. It was something private, something she would never let down in public. Mary does not hesitate. She wipes Jesus' feet with her hair. It is an act of deep humility, the kind of thing a servant would do. The lowest task in the household was washing someone's feet, and Mary gladly takes that place. The perfume spreads across the room, and soon the entire house is filled with its fragrance, and everyone at the dinner can smell it. It is indeed an extravagant act of devotion. But not everyone sees it that way. One voice cuts through the room. Judas Iscariot. John reminds us who he was, the disciple who would betray Jesus. Judas looks at Mary and what she has done, and he immediately objects. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? On the surface, it sounds reasonable. Like I said, 300 denarii could help a lot of poor people. It sounds practical, responsible. But John tells us what's really going on in the heart of Judas. He does not say this because he cares anything about the poor. He says it because he's a thief. Judas was the one who kept the money bag for the group, and he's been dipping inside of that money bag. So when he sees all this perfume poured out, what he really sees is a year's worth of wages slipping through his greedy fingers. Extravagant devotion bothers a heart that is controlled by selfishness. But before the criticism can spread further, Jesus speaks. Leave her alone. He defends her. What Mary has done is not foolish. It is not wasteful. It is meaningful. Jesus explains that her act is preparing him for burial. In a way she might not fully understand, Mary has done something prophetic. Her act points forward to the moment when Jesus will die and be placed in a tomb. And then Jesus adds something that sounds startling at first. The poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me. Jesus, he's not dismissing care for the poor. Scripture consistently commands generosity and compassion. But what Jesus is saying is this. There will always be opportunities to help the poor, but the opportunity to show devotion to him in this moment will not last. Very soon, Jesus will be gone. Mary seems to understand something that the others in the room have not yet grasped. The time is short. And so she pours out everything she has in love and worship at the feet of Jesus. When you step back at this scene in Bethany, it almost feels like something we have seen before in Scripture. Two people standing before the Lord, two outward acts that both appear religious, but two different hearts. That's exactly what happens in Genesis chapter 4. Two brothers came to worship God. Cain brings an offering. Abel brings an offering. Outwardly, they look similar. Abel brings the firstborn of his flock, the best he has, while Cain's offering reveals that his heart is not right with God. And the Lord, who sees deeper through appearances, accepts Abel's offering but not Cain's. The story teaches us something that echoes throughout the Bible. God is not only looking at what we bring, he's looking at the heart that brings it. And that's exactly what we see in this house in Bethany. Two hearts revealed. Mary pours out costly devotion. Judas speaks spiritual words. But the heart is somewhere else entirely. After hearing the story, the questions begins to come closer to home. Because the scene of Bethany is not just about Mary and Judas. It's really about the kind of heart each one of us brings to Jesus. Mary shows us what true worship is like. Her devotion was not cautious. It was not calculated. It was costly. She wasn't asking the kind of questions we often ask. How little can I give? Is this convenient right now? Can this wait until later? She simply gives Jesus her best while she has the opportunity. And that confronts one of the quietest temptations of our time. We try to fit Jesus into our schedule instead of building our lives around him. Our culture teaches us to reduce commitments, protect our time, and only do what feels manageable. And sometimes that mindset slowly creeps into our spiritual lives. Maybe it sounds like this. Church, it's starting to interfere with family time. I just need a long break for a while. Maybe our small group should only meet once a month. And little by little, Jesus moves from the center of our life to the edges of it. Not because we openly reject him, but because we slowly are arranging our lives around everything else. But love for Christ doesn't ask, what's the least I can do? Love asks, how can I give him my best? At the same time, the story also warns us about something else. Because Judas reminds us that it is very possible to be very close to Jesus outwardly, while something else quietly rules the heart. From the outside, Judas sounded spiritual. He talked about helping the poor. But beneath those words was a different treasure. And that raises a searching question for every one of us. Most people do not openly reject Jesus the way the religious leaders did. The more subtle danger is a divided heart. Heart that learns how to speak the language of faith while something else becomes the center of our life. It might be money, it might be comfort, it might be reputation. It might even be control over our time and priorities. But God sees deeper than explanations. God sees the heart. And then Jesus' response brings us to the deepest truth of all. When he defends Mary, he says something in the room that people might not fully understand yet. She kept this for the day of my burial. In other words, Mary's act of worship is pointing to something far bigger than the moment. It's pointing to the cross. Jesus knows that within days he will be arrested, tried, and crucified. Mary may not understand every detail yet, but her devotion recognizes something many others are missing. Jesus came to give life, and that is why this story matters for us today, because it is possible to talk about Jesus, sing about Jesus, admire Jesus, without truly understanding why he came. Jesus didn't come just to teach us moral lessons. He did not come simply to inspire us. He came to die. He came to lay down his life so that sinners like us could be forgiven and reconciled to God. The cross, it was no accident. It was a mission. And when that truly sinks into our hearts, worship can no longer remain casual. It becomes grateful. It becomes personal. It becomes wholehearted. Mary's perfume filled the entire house with fragrance. And in the same way, when someone truly understands the love of Christ and gives their life to him, that devotion begins to affect the atmosphere around them. Faith grows deeper, encouragement spreads, and slowly the fragrance of devotion begins to fill the house. Which brings us back to the quiet question of this passage. What kind of heart do we bring to Jesus? But what happened in that house? It didn't stay private for long. Word began spreading that Jesus was in Bethany, and that Lazarus, the man he raised from the dead, was there too. And soon people started coming from everywhere. Some would believe. Others would begin plotting even more seriously against him. Let's see how John describes this moment. John 12, 9 to 11. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. That dinner in Bethany doesn't stay private for long. They didn't have social media. They didn't have Facebook, Instagram, or any of the other ones, but word traveled fast. Doesn't it always when Jesus is close by? Especially now, after what happened to Lazarus? People begin streaming into Jerusalem for the Passover, and the city is already buzzing with questions about Jesus. Will he come to the feast? Will he show himself publicly? What will happen if Jesus comes to Jerusalem? Then the news begins to spread through the crowd. Jesus is in Bethany. Did you hear it? In Bethany. Not far off from Jerusalem. It's just a short walk. Jesus is there and Lazarus is too. I'm heading to Bethany, right? And that is enough to bring people out of the city and into the village. Before long, the roads leading to Bethany are filled with curious feet. Men, women, families, travelers, locals, they're all moving in the same direction. Or you can just hear it. Is it true? Is Lazarus really here? Is this the man who was dead? Is this the Jesus who called him out of the tomb? And so a large crowd gathers. And some come because of Jesus. Others come because they want to see Lazarus. They want to see a man who was dead and now is alive. They want to see him with their own eyes. They want to stand near him. They want to satisfy their curiosity. After all, this is no rumor to them now. Lazarus is not just a story being passed from one person to another. He's standing right in front of them. He's alive. He's breathing. He's walking. He's talking. Perhaps some of the crowd stare at him quietly. They are trying to figure this out. Because not long ago, this man was dead in a tomb. Mourners had wept for him. The grave had claimed him. But now he is here. And his presence says something without speaking a word. Jesus gives life. Lazarus does not preach a sermon. John records no speech from him. He does not need to say anything. His life is a testimony. Just seeing him enough is to force people to wrestle with the truth of who Jesus is. And many do. They look at Lazarus. Many of the Jews are going over to Jesus and they're believing in him. The miracle does what signs are meant to do. It points beyond itself to Christ. Lazarus becomes living evidence. This Jesus is no ordinary teacher, no mere wonder worker, he's not just a passing religious figure. The people begin to believe that Jesus truly has the power of God. But not everyone responds that way. While some in Bethany are being drawn towards Jesus, others are growing in darker in opposition. The chief priests hear what is happening. They see the crowds. They hear the reports. They understand what Lazarus means. And instead of being softened by the miracle, they become more determined in their resistance. If Lazarus is the evidence, they will get rid of the evidence. If people are believing because of him, Lazarus must go. So the chief priests make plans not only to kill Jesus, but Lazarus as well. It is a chilling moment. Think about it. Here's a man who was dead and has been given life by Jesus, and the religious leaders' response is not worship, not wonder, not repentance, but murder. They cannot deny what happened, so they decide to destroy the proof of the one that came to life. The miracle that leads some people to faith leads others to harden their hearts even further. And there in Bethany, The lines are becoming clear. A crowd stands in awe. Many begin to believe, and the powerful men begin plotting death. All because Jesus gave life to a man who had once been in the grave. A few years ago, I had this really beautiful blue picnic table. It had a glass top. One morning I walked outside and the entire glass top was shattered all over the ground. You try cleaning up glass that is in grass. That is a challenge. But it was not cracked. It was totally shattered. And the strange thing was, there was no storm that night, no wind, no hail, nothing that would explain it. The apartment complex actually, they have security cameras that cover the area. So I asked about the footage. Apparently, the cameras didn't see anything. That's where my conspiracy theory started. Who really broke the glass? Because when you're standing there looking at shattered glass over the ground, you know something happened. Glass doesn't just explode for no reason at all. Something caused it. Even if the people couldn't explain it, the evidence was sitting there in plain sight. I never went further because my wife would not allow me to take it further. But I was prepared to go the whole distance. I wish I would have had my Ring camera back then. What's remarkable about this moment in Bethany, though, is that Lazarus never says a word. There's no sermon from him, no speech, no explanation. He is simply there alive. And that is enough. Just like that picnic table, his life had become living evidence of what Jesus can do. Because of him, people begin coming to see Jesus, and many begin to believe. And that shows us something important about how God often works. A life changed by Jesus became a powerful evidence of his power. Most of us, actually I told Jeff he could preach a sermon today, and he didn't want to because many people can't envision themselves doing such a thing. Many believers feel like we don't have the right words, we don't have the right training or the right confidence to explain the gospel. But Lazarus reminds us of something encouraging. You do not have to say much for your life to point people to Jesus. When Christ truly changes a person, people begin to take notice. They see how we speak. Maybe and before we would use a few cuss words. They no longer see that. They no longer hear our gossip. They see how we treat others different, how we face hardship, how we live with hope in a world that feels hopeless. Our life becomes a testimony. Our story becomes evidence. In fact, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians in the beginning says that we were once spiritually dead, but God made us alive together with Christ. In that sense, every believer shares something in common with Lazarus. We were dead, and Jesus gave us life. And when that kind of transformation becomes visible, people respond. That's exactly what happened in Bethany. Some people saw Lazarus and believed in Jesus. But others saw the same evidence and hardened their hearts in opposition. John tells us the chief priests began making plans to put Lazarus to death as well as Jesus. Instead of accepting the evidence, they tried to silence it. And that reveals a sobering truth about the human heart. Evidence alone does not change a person. The real issue is whether the heart is willing to submit to Jesus. True groups of people stand in the same village. They see the same miracle. Some believed, others resisted. And the same thing happens today. When people encounter Jesus through the gospel, through the testimony of changed lives, through the truth of his word, some hearts are drawn towards him, but others resist. Which means the most important question is not simply what evidence we have seen. The most important question is how our hearts respond to Jesus. And that brings us to a story from modern history that will illustrate this in a powerful way. Does anybody remember the Watergate scandal of the 70s? At the center of that political storm was a man named Charles Colson. Colson was working for the White House with President Richard Nixon, and he had one of the most toughest reputations as a political operator. People often called him Nixon's hatchet man. Colson himself later admitted that power and winning were everything to him. He was ruthless in politics, and he was not ashamed of it. But when the Watergate scandal broke, everything began to collapse. Investigations started. Charges were filed. Careers were destroyed. Eventually, Colson himself was sentenced to prison. But before he went to prison, something unexpected happened. A friend shared the gospel with him. Colson later described sitting in his car after that conversation, overwhelmed by the reality of sin and the truth of who Jesus really is. And at that night, in that moment, he surrendered his life to Christ. So when he went to prison, something became clear. He wasn't the same man anymore. That ruthless political strategist had become a humbler follower of Jesus Christ. So after serving his sentence, Colson didn't try to become that political power again. Instead, he started a ministry called Prison Fellowship, sharing the gospel with inmates across the country and eventually around the world. Thousands upon thousands of prisoners have heard of Christ because of that one transformed life. But when Colson first announced his conversion, many people didn't believe it. Some mocked him, some said it was a publicity stunt, others assumed it wouldn't last. Yet over time, something happened. His life changed so dramatically that many critics eventually admitted something real had taken place. And that's exactly what we see in our passage today. Lazarus doesn't preach a sermon. He doesn't stand in front of a crowd and give a speech. He simply lives. But his life becomes powerful evidence that Jesus has power over death. Because Lazarus is alive, people come looking for Jesus. John tells us that many people believed in Jesus because of him. But at the very same time, the religious leaders decide that Lazarus has to die. Some people came to believe because they saw Lazarus. Others wanted to silence him, but no one could ignore him. When Jesus truly changes a life, it becomes impossible to hide. So let me ask you this morning, if Jesus has truly raised you from spiritual death, if he has forgiven your sin, if he has given you new life, does your life point people to Jesus? Because someone in your life is watching, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, a family member. May never read the Gospel of John, but they will read your life. And when they see the difference that Jesus has made in you, they just might start looking for him too. So the question this passage leaves us is this: has Jesus truly given you new life? And if he has, does your life make others want to find him? Let us pray.